When she reaches out after weeks of silence, your first task is to confront the truth, not the fantasy, not the illusion you've built in your head during her absence, but the reality of the situation. And that's not easy. It's not comfortable. It doesn't feel good. But it's necessary. The most destructive thing you can do at that moment is lie to yourself about what her message means, about what you mean to her, about where you stand, because false hope is more dangerous than despair. At least despair acknowledges what's broken. False hope pretends it's still intact. The mind will rush to tell stories. Maybe she missed me, but maybe she realized I'm the one. This is a sign things are going back to how they were. That's not truth. That's projection. That's desire masquerading as fact. The real question isn't what you want it to mean, it's what it actually does mean. And often, the answer is complex, uncertain, and incomplete. And that's okay. But you need to be honest about it. Because clarity starts with truth. If you build your next move on a lie, you'll pay for it later, emotionally, mentally, even physically. There is a deep temptation to immediately respond, to relieve the tension of waiting, to finally scratch the itch of curiosity. But the wiser path is to observe first, to feel everything, the rush of emotion, the confusion, the resentment, the relief, and still resist the urge to act. Truth requires discipline. It asks you to pause, to investigate, to recognize the difference between an event and your interpretation of it. She messaged you. That is the event. But everything else, what it means, what she feels, what you think she feels, that's conjecture until proven otherwise. Truth in this context also means confronting yourself. Ask, why does this message have such a hold on me? Why does a single notification shake me? What does that reveal about my current emotional state, about my level of attachment, my self-worth, my preparedness to move on or re-engage? If your mood is hijacked by her sudden reappearance, that is not evidence of love. It may be evidence of unresolved emotional dependency. And to face that possibility is painful. But it's also liberating, because what you can see clearly, you can work with. What you deny will control you from the shadows. There's also the truth about her, and that can be even harder to accept. People reach out for all kinds of reasons: curiosity, boredom, guilt, loneliness, validation, or a moment of weakness. Very often it's not because they've had a deep revelation about you or the relationship. It's because something in their own world triggered a response. And that's not necessarily malicious. It's just human. But if you assume depth where there is only impulse, you're setting yourself up for disappointment. That doesn't mean she doesn't care, but it means that care might not be enough. And if you've built castles in your mind during her absence, it's time to walk outside and see whether the foundation actually exists. Truth requires that you separate her actions from your emotions. The message may stir old feelings, rekindle old dreams, or reignite old pain, but the message itself is just text. It doesn't rewrite history. It doesn't erase the silence. It doesn't fix what was broken. A few words can open a door, yes, but you need to ask whether it's a door worth walking through, or one that leads back into the same confusion you just fought to climb out of. Sometimes facing the truth means acknowledging that the person who once meant everything to you may not be capable of giving you what you need, and that's a brutal realization. But it's also a necessary one, because continuing to chase potential over reality is the fastest way to lose yourself. You don't get stronger by hiding from the truth. You get stronger by facing it, raw, painful, and unfiltered. Ultimately, when she reaches out, your job is not to chase, plead, or even respond immediately. Your job is to see clearly, because when you see things as they are, not better, not worse, you reclaim your power. You stop living in reaction and start acting with intention. You stop hoping and start knowing. And that shift, that transition from fantasy to truth, is where all your future strength is built. When she finally reaches out after weeks of silence, something inside you may stir instantly: hope, longing, confusion, even desperation. It's a wave of emotion that can feel overwhelming, and your first instinct might be to respond without hesitation. After all, you've likely spent countless hours thinking about her, wondering if she would ever reach out, revisiting old memories, rehearsing conversations that never happened. So when that message arrives, it can feel like a moment of salvation, as if the emotional drought is finally over. But this is the precise moment where many lose themselves, by acting from emotional hunger instead of grounded principle. Comfort is seductive. The comfort of hearing from her again, of imagining things going back to how they once were, of escaping the uncertainty that's been gnawing at you. This comfort can blur your judgment. It tempts you to compromise your values, your standards, your dignity, and often men do. They rush to reply with warmth, eagerness, or emotional vulnerability, hoping to secure her affection again, without even considering what message that sends about their self-worth. The reality is, when you sacrifice your integrity to ease discomfort, you're not healing the wound. You're feeding it. You're not fixing the situation. You're betraying yourself. Integrity isn't just a lofty ideal. It's your internal compass. It's the line you draw to protect your sense of self from being eroded by temporary emotions. Integrity means having boundaries and standards, even when you're emotionally compromised. It means knowing what you deserve, what you stand for, and what you will not accept, even if it means losing the very person you crave. Responding from integrity may mean taking a step back. It may mean asking questions before you offer affection. It may mean being silent when every part of you wants to scream. Because in that silence, you're preserving something far more important than a fleeting connection. You're preserving your relationship with yourself. Ask yourself, what kind of man do you want to be? One who folds at the slightest touch of validation? Or one who responds only when it aligns with his core values? One who is driven by emotional chaos? Or one who remains anchored in truth and self-respect? Every decision you make when you're emotionally vulnerable builds or breaks your character. If you rush in just to soothe your longing, you might find short-term relief, but long-term regret. Because if you compromise your dignity today, you'll have to live with the consequences tomorrow. She might come back, but if you come back to her in a state of emotional dependence, you'll repeat the same patterns that caused the disconnect in the first place. Emotional comfort isn't always a gift, it can be a trap. The message she sends may seem like a door to reconnection, but if that door leads you to abandon your values, it's not worth walking through. You need to ask, why now? Why after weeks? What does this message truly mean? And most importantly, what do you need in order to move forward with strength? If your need for comfort overrides your need for clarity, then you're setting yourself up to be used, even unintentionally. It's not about demonizing her motives. It's about recognizing your own vulnerability and protecting yourself from exploitation, even by those you care about. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is not respond right away, not out of pride, not out of manipulation, but out of discipline, to buy yourself time to think, to process, to consult your values. Integrity is not about controlling others, it's about controlling yourself. And it's in these moments when temptation and emotion collide that your character is tested. Do you default to comfort or do you rise to the standard you've set for your life? People often say they want respect from others, but they don't realize that self-respect is the foundation. You can't demand respect from the world if you keep abandoning yourself for a moment of affection or attention. And that's what sacrificing integrity does. It teaches the world that your boundaries are negotiable when emotions get high. You don't gain love through sacrifice of your core, you gain codependency. Real love, real connection, honors your strength. It doesn't require you to kneel at the altar of momentary comfort. So when she reaches out, let that message sit. Let it breathe. Let your emotions settle. Then respond, if it aligns with who you are and who you're becoming. Not out of fear of losing her, but out of commitment to never lose yourself again. Because in the end, it's not about whether she stays or goes. It's about whether you can look in the mirror and know, I chose strength over ease, principle over panic, integrity over impulse. That's where real power lives. When she reaches out after weeks of silence, it can feel like a floodgate opens inside you. Emotions you thought you had buried come rushing back. Hope, excitement, confusion, fear, anger, maybe even desperation. It's tempting to blame her for all of it, to believe that her silence caused your suffering and her sudden message is responsible for the storm now brewing in your chest. But here's a difficult truth you must accept if you ever want to grow into someone who commands respect and peace of mind. Your emotions are your responsibility. No one has the right or the power to regulate your internal world except you. That's a heavy burden, but it's also your greatest freedom. We live in a culture where it's easy to adopt a victim mindset, to say, see ghosted me, or hid she's playing with my emotions, and use that as an excuse for our reactions. But if you want to be a man of depth and strength, you can't live at the mercy of what someone else says or does. Her message might catch you off guard, yes. It might stir up old wounds, yes. But the emotional reaction belongs to you. It is not her responsibility to manage how you feel, it is yours. This doesn't mean she's without accountability. People should act with integrity and compassion, and yes, disappearing for weeks and then resurfacing without explanation may be inconsiderate or confusing. But that doesn't absolve you of your job to respond consciously rather than react impulsively. Emotional maturity is not about eliminating emotions. It's about learning how to hold them, process them, and respond from clarity instead of chaos. You are not a passenger in your own life driven by emotional turbulence. You are the driver. And if you're not in the driver's seat, someone else always will be. Taking responsibility for your emotions also means understanding them, not suppressing them. If you feel anxious after receiving her message, don't run from that. Sit with it. Ask yourself, why does this message make me feel this way? What am I truly afraid of? Is it rejection? Is it the idea that I still care when I told myself I didn't? Is it fear of opening old wounds? These are important questions, because the more you understand what's happening inside you, the less likely you are to make decisions you'll regret. Awareness precedes mastery. You can't change what you refuse to acknowledge. Sometimes we use other people as emotional regulators. We hand them the keys to our peace, and then become resentful when they don't drive us where we want to go. If you give someone the power to validate you, you also give them the power to break you. This is especially true in situations where romantic history, emotional attachment, or unresolved issues are involved. You cannot outsource your healing. You cannot wait for closure from someone else to feel whole. If you were wounded by the silence, the healing must begin within you, not from their next message, but from your next choice. The emotional intensity that her message triggers is not inherently a sign of love. It might be a sign of unhealed trauma, of unmet needs, of unresolved attachments. And if you don't take responsibility for those responses, you may mistake emotional volatility for emotional connection. This is where people often get stuck. They confuse intensity with intimacy. They think that because it hurts, it must be real. But pain alone is not proof of love. Sometimes it's just proof that you have internal work to do. That work starts with accepting that no one can rescue you from yourself. Taking ownership of your emotions is also what allows you to respond rather than react. When you feel something intensely, reacting is easy. It's natural. But responding, that takes strength. That takes a pause. That takes discipline. You might want to type a long, emotionally charged message. You might want to express every frustration, every hope, every question you've been holding in. But would that be coming from your grounded self, or from the wounded parts of you? Responsible emotional behavior doesn't mean suppressing what you feel. It means translating it into words and actions that reflect your values, not just your impulses. You are allowed to feel disappointed. You are allowed to feel hurt. You are allowed to feel hope. But none of those feelings should dictate your identity or your direction. When you take responsibility for your emotions, you stop needing her to fix them. You no longer wait for someone else to provide closure or clarity or comfort. You realize that everything you need to navigate this situation, strength, awareness, dignity, is already within you. And once you understand that, you stop being a hostage to the past. You start becoming the architect of your future. So when her message comes in, and your heart starts racing, breathe, feel everything. But then remember who you are. You are not your reaction. You are not your fear. You are not your longing. You are the one who observes, learns, and chooses, deliberately, wisely, and with honor. That's what it means to take responsibility for your emotions. That's what it means to lead yourself. When she reaches out after weeks of silence, one of the most important and difficult things you can do is stop and ask yourself a brutally honest question: what do I truly want? Not what you feel in the heat of the moment, not what your ego wants to prove, and not what your loneliness is whispering in your ear, but what your deeper, stable, honest self genuinely desires. If you don't take the time to define that for yourself, you're going to be pulled in every direction by emotion, by old attachments, and by the temptation to relive a past that may no longer serve you. The problem is that most people never really pause long enough to ask this. They react. They see the message and immediately feel a rush, the excitement of being remembered, the hope that something's changed, or maybe the hunger for closure. But if you respond out of impulse, you might move towards something that looks good in the moment but ends in even more confusion or hurt. That's why you must ask and answer with depth and honesty, what do I want from this? Is it reconciliation, clarity, validation, closure, revenge? Or am I simply addicted to the emotional chaos this person brings? The clarity of your intent is everything. If you want to reconnect because there was genuine love and mutual respect, then your path forward will look very different than if you're just craving a hit of emotional intensity. And here's the truth many people avoid. If you don't know what you want, someone else will decide for you. In this case, that might be her. She might reach out with unclear motives, with mixed feelings, or with no real intention beyond easing her own guilt or curiosity. And if you haven't already anchored yourself in what you truly want, you will adapt to her direction instead of standing in your own. It's a difficult thing to admit, but sometimes we want someone not because we love them, but because we feel incomplete without them. And when that's the case, our desire is not rooted in strength, but in lack. So when you ask yourself what you truly want, you also have to ask where that desire is coming from. Is it coming from a place of wholeness or from a place of woundedness? Are you seeking partnership, or are you seeking relief from your own internal discomfort? That's the difference between building something real and chasing a fantasy. You have to be willing to challenge your own narratives. Maybe you've told yourself that if she ever reached out again, you'd jump at the chance. Maybe you imagine the perfect conversation, the perfect apology, the perfect reunion. But fantasy is not reality. And when reality arrives, in the form of a short message after weeks of silence, you have to see it for what it is, a new opportunity, yes, but also a potential trap. A trap that only works if you're unclear about what you actually want and need going forward. This isn't just about her intentions, it's about yours. If you want to rebuild trust, do you believe that's truly possible based on what has happened so far? If you want closure, will you accept that her message may not give you everything you were hoping for? If you want connection, are you willing to be vulnerable again, even if it means risking more pain? These are not light questions. They require courage to answer. But avoiding them only sets you up for more confusion down the line. A man who knows what he wants is hard to manipulate. He's hard to sway. He's hard to pull into emotional games. Because he's not reacting. He's responding. He's grounded. If your answer to "what do I want" leads you to conclude that a reply is worth it, then respond with clarity. Don't pretend. Don't play games. Speak from truth, not from strategy. On the other hand, if your answer reveals that you don't want to reopen something that once broke you, then let your silence be a statement of your growth. Either way, the power is in knowing your motive. And if you're uncertain, that's okay too, but own that uncertainty. Don't cover it up with false confidence. Don't reply just to feel less uncomfortable. Sit in the discomfort until you get clear. Your emotions are data, but your decision should come from reflection. You're not a child reacting to a stimulus. You're a man choosing a path. So, before you pick up your phone, before you respond with your heart on your sleeve or with your guard fully up, take that moment. Be still. Ask the question. Sit with it until your answer is clean, solid, and true. Because how you respond will shape not only this interaction, it will shape the way you handle your own self-respect from this day forward. Want wisely, want consciously, and let that clarity guide you. When she reaches out after weeks of silence, it's easy to feel like something significant has changed. Your heart may leap at the sight of her name on your screen. You may immediately begin spinning a story in your mind. She must have missed me. She's come to her senses. Or she wants to come back. But that kind of thinking can be dangerous because it's rooted in assumption, not in evidence. One of the most important things you can do in that moment is recognize the difference between her curiosity and her commitment. They are not the same, and if you confuse one for the other, you risk re-entering a situation that hasn't fundamentally changed. Curiosity is easy. It costs nothing. It can be driven by boredom, nostalgia, guilt, or even loneliness. People often reach out not because they want to rebuild something serious, but because they want to check if the door is still open. Maybe she had a dream about you. Maybe she saw your name pop up somewhere online. Maybe someone mentioned you in passing and it stirred a feeling. None of those things necessarily mean she wants to invest in a meaningful relationship again. It might just mean she's wondering how you're doing. And while that might feel flattering, it's not the same thing as her showing up with clear intent, with action, and with emotional maturity. Commitment, on the other hand, is something entirely different. Commitment requires effort. It requires reflection, responsibility, and a willingness to work through discomfort. Commitment isn't just texting out of the blue. It's following through. It's making space for real conversation, showing vulnerability, and making amends where necessary. A person who is truly committed won't leave you guessing. They won't drop breadcrumbs just to see if you'll bite. They will communicate clearly, not play games. So when that message arrives, ask yourself, is this curiosity disguised as connection? Or is it something deeper, something real? You have to be careful not to project your own desire onto her actions. Just because you're ready to pick up where things left off doesn't mean she is. Just because you still feel deeply doesn't mean she does. And just because she reached out doesn't mean she's ready to be consistent. You owe it to yourself to be honest about what she's actually doing, not what you hope it means. This doesn't make her a villain, it just makes her human. People are often conflicted, unclear, or emotionally unresolved. But it's your responsibility to protect your time, your peace, and your growth by recognizing what's real. One of the biggest mistakes people make in these moments is rushing to re-engage without asking critical questions. If you leap back into conversation just because the silence is broken, you're ignoring the lessons that silence was trying to teach you. Why did the communication stop? What was left unresolved? Were your needs ever truly met in that relationship, or are you just hoping they will be this time? Curiosity from someone else should not override the standards you've set for yourself. If someone wants access to your heart again, they need to earn it, not just trigger it. A curious person checks in. A committed person shows up. A curious person might flirt, reminisce, or apologize vaguely. A committed person takes accountability, communicates intentions, and follows through with action. You must learn to discern the difference. And to do that, you must be anchored in self-respect. The more grounded you are in your worth, the easier it becomes to see through ambiguity. The more desperate you are for her attention, the more likely you are to interpret every message as a promise when it may only be a passing thought. It's not wrong for her to be curious. We all wonder about people from our past. But the key is how you respond to that curiosity. Do you give it power it hasn't earned? Do you drop everything and open your heart without any boundaries? Or do you pause, observe, and allow her actions, not just her words, to show you what she really wants? You don't need to shut the door entirely. You don't need to become cold or hostile. But you do need to stay aware. If the pattern is inconsistency, if she's disappeared before without explanation, if she's only showing up now that you've started to move on, these are not signs of commitment. They're signs of emotional convenience. So the next time she reaches out, take a breath. Step back from the emotion and look at the facts. Ask yourself if what's happening is rooted in depth or an impulse. Don't rush to label it as reconciliation when it might just be a moment of curiosity. Let her actions define her intent, and let your standards determine your response. You deserve connection, not confusion. You deserve commitment, not curiosity. Never settle for less just because it feels good in the moment. Choose truth over comfort, and you'll never lose yourself again. When she finally reaches out after weeks of silence, it's tempting to forget everything that happened in her absence. In that one message, it can feel like your mind races ahead to the possibility of reconnection, reconciliation, or even redemption. But before you reply, before you fall into the old rhythm, you need to stop and ask yourself one of the most powerful and necessary questions: what did the silence teach you? Because if you don't reflect on the silence, on what it revealed, what it triggered, and what it transformed in you, you risk stepping right back into the same dynamic that once left you lost. Silence is not just an absence of communication, it's a mirror. It reflects your emotional habits, your expectations, your fears, and your sense of self-worth. It exposes the places inside you that are dependent on external validation. When she was silent, what surfaced in you? Did you feel abandoned, panicked, or angry? Did you obsess over what you did wrong or replay past conversations, hoping to find a clue? Or did you find moments of painful clarity, where you realized you were more attached to the idea of her than to the reality of how she treated you. Silence gives you space to see clearly, if you're willing to look. In that silence, there may have been nights you couldn't sleep, mornings you woke up hoping for a message, and hours spent trying to distract yourself from the weight of unanswered questions. But through all of that, something else was growing too: awareness. You started to learn how much of yourself you gave away. You started to notice how often you overextended, justified, or hoped for things that were never consistent. You began to understand how loneliness can deceive you into chasing people who are not committed to staying. That growth is not something to dismiss when the message finally comes. It's sacred, it's hard-earned, and it should never be abandoned in exchange for temporary relief. If you felt disrespected by her disappearance, that feeling matters. If you discovered that your peace improved without the emotional roller coaster, that discovery matters. If you realized that you've been neglecting your goals, your passions, or your friendships because you were emotionally tied to her, that matters. Reflection is not about bitterness, it's about clarity. And clarity is what protects you from repeating cycles that no longer serve you. Ask yourself, who were you when the silence began, and who are you now? Are you more desperate or more disciplined, more attached or more aware? Did the silence lead you back to yourself, or are you still waiting for someone else to make you feel whole? The answer to these questions will shape how you respond. If you don't reflect, you'll react. But if you do reflect, you'll respond with purpose. You won't be swayed by charm or familiarity. You'll respond only if it aligns with the person you are now, not the version of you that was afraid to be alone. There is wisdom in pain if you're brave enough to listen. The discomfort you felt in her absence wasn't just about missing her. It was about facing yourself. Maybe you realized you had tied your happiness to someone else's presence. Maybe you learned that your self-worth was built on being chosen. That insight is painful, yes, but it's also liberating, because once you see it, you can choose differently. You can begin to build an inner life that's stable, grounded, and independent of who texts you or who disappears. You can become the kind of person who is complete, not just available. If her silence was unexpected, it likely forced you to confront things you didn't want to see. And those are the very things that you must carry forward, not the fantasy of what could be, but the reality of what has been. If she left without explanation, that tells you something about her emotional availability. If she comes back without taking responsibility, that tells you something about her maturity. If she reaches out casually after vanishing, that tells you something about her understanding of respect. You need to trust what the silence showed you, because silence speaks volumes if you're paying attention. This isn't about resentment. It's about self-honesty. If you want to live with integrity, you have to honor the lessons the silence taught you. That means being willing to walk away from people who disrupt your peace. It means refusing to forget what you learned just because you missed the comfort of connection. It means choosing truth over longing. And most of all, it means trusting yourself, your growth, your resilience, and your newfound clarity. So when she reaches out, remember the silence. Not just the pain of it, but the wisdom it gave you. Let it guide you. Let it protect you. Let it remind you of everything you had to face when she was gone. Because if you learned something valuable during that time, don't throw it away for a few kind words or a nostalgic memory. Use it. Let it shape your decision. Let it shape your future. That is how you honor yourself. That is how you move forward with strength. When she finally reaches out after weeks of silence, every part of you might want to respond instantly. Maybe it feels like relief. Maybe it feels like hope being reignited. Maybe it feels like a window back into something familiar. But before you do anything, pause, breathe. This is not just about her message. It's about who you are now. And more importantly, who you are choosing to be in this moment. Because how you respond speaks volumes about your strength, your boundaries, your self-worth. If you respond out of weakness, you hand over your power. If you respond out of strength, you protect your dignity. Weakness in this situation doesn't mean emotion, it means desperation. It means replying not because it aligns with your values, but because you're afraid to lose her again. Weakness is rooted in fear. Fear of being alone, fear of missing a chance, fear that you won't find someone else. It can make you forget everything you learned in her absence. It makes you shrink, second-guess yourself, and prioritize someone else's inconsistency over your own peace. But when you respond from that place, you're not standing up for yourself. You're surrendering yourself. Responding with strength is not about being cold or cruel. It's about being conscious. It's about being measured, self-respecting, and calm. Strength means choosing clarity over chaos and self-respect over emotional impulse. It means looking at her message not as a lifeline, but as data. What is she saying? Why now? Does her message reflect accountability, respect, or intentionality? Or is it vague, casual, or emotionally open-ended? When you're strong, you don't just react because someone remembered you exist. You evaluate whether their presence now deserves access to your emotional world. Strength means you remember who you became during the silence. You remember that you survived her absence. You rebuilt, or at least began the process of rebuilding. And now, with one message, you have to decide whether to step forward or fall backward. Weakness pulls you into wishful thinking. Strength anchors you in what is. If she vanished without explanation and now reappears without context or apology, your strength is what will stop you from rushing back in, not out of revenge, but out of self-respect. Too often, people confuse being available with being loving. They think that responding immediately or emotionally shows care, but real strength in response is not about proving you still care. It's about proving to yourself that you've grown. It's about making decisions based on what aligns with your current standards, not old wounds or unfinished fantasies. When you respond from a place of strength, your words are measured, your tone is calm. You don't need to perform, impress, or chase. You don't need to ask why she disappeared. You already know enough to make your own decisions. Maybe she misses you. Maybe she's testing the waters. Maybe she regrets something. But none of that changes who you've become in her absence. That growth is your anchor. It's what prevents you from being swept away again. Because when someone has been silent for weeks, their return, no matter how well-intentioned, should be met with discernment, not desperation. You don't owe anyone immediate access just because they remembered your name. Access to you is a privilege. And if she wants that access again, she needs to show, not just say, that she's ready to handle it with care. Responding with strength also means you're not looking for her message to complete you. You are already whole. You don't need her attention to validate your worth. You don't need her affection to confirm your desirability. You've spent time learning that your value doesn't decrease based on someone's ability to recognize it. So now, when she reaches out, your response should reflect that truth. It doesn't have to be cold or indifferent. It just needs to be grounded, intentional, and true to where you are now, not where you were when she left. There's real power in restraint, in taking a moment to think before replying, in asking yourself if engaging is wise. Sometimes strength looks like a simple, mature reply. Sometimes it looks like no reply at all. The important part is that whatever you choose, it's your choice, not your emotions' choice, not your ego's choice, yours. That's what emotional leadership looks like. And it's that leadership that separates a man who is owned by his past from one who owns his future. So when the moment comes, when your phone lights up and her name appears, remember you are not that desperate version of yourself who once waited, who once wondered, who once bent. You are stronger now. You've learned, you've grown. And your response is not just a message, it's a reflection of your evolution. Choose strength, speak from stability, and whatever happens next, you'll walk forward with your dignity intact and your self-respect unshaken. Because that's what it means to truly respond with strength. When she reaches out after weeks of silence, and you begin to consider letting her back into your life, there's one question you must carry with you at every step. Will this door lead somewhere better, or will it take me right back to where I was broken? The idea of reopening the door might feel hopeful or even romantic. It's tempting to believe that time has changed everything, that maybe the space between you allowed both of you to grow, and that this could be a fresh start. But hope, when unexamined, becomes dangerous. A door should only be reopened if walking through it leads to something new, something healthier, something built on truth, not the repetition of the same confusion, disappointment, or emotional instability that once drained you. We often overestimate the power of reconnection and underestimate the importance of transformation. Reopening the door should not be about going back. It should be about moving forward consciously and with higher standards. If nothing is fundamentally changed, if she hasn't shown growth, clarity, or responsibility, then opening that door doesn't invite love, it invites déjà vu. You have to ask yourself whether the version of her that disappeared and the version reaching out now are genuinely different. More importantly, ask whether you are different. Because if you've done the work to grow, heal, and elevate your standards, then the door you reopen must reflect that growth, not reverse it. You're not just reopening a connection, you're reopening your time, your emotions, your energy, and your vulnerability. These things are sacred. They are the currency of your well-being. And just because someone wants back in doesn't mean they deserve it. Wanting you and being ready for you are not the same thing. She might miss the comfort, the attention, or the emotional familiarity, but that doesn't mean she's prepared to offer something better. Your responsibility is to ensure that your future is not built on recycled mistakes. That means asking hard questions and being willing to walk away if the answers don't meet your new standards. A door that leads somewhere better requires honesty, not nostalgia. It requires effort, not just emotion. If she's serious about reconnecting, it should show in the way she communicates. It should show in her willingness to talk openly about what went wrong, to take responsibility, and to make real changes. If she can't offer that, then what exactly are you reopening the door to? Another cycle of highs and lows? Another stretch of waiting for consistency that never comes? You've been through that already. You don't need more history. You need progress. Sometimes the idea of unfinished business keeps people tethered to relationships that were never built to last. But closure doesn't always come from another conversation. Sometimes closure comes from realizing that not every door is meant to be opened again. Especially when that door leads to more confusion than clarity, more guessing than growth. If it didn't nourish your self-worth the first time, what makes you think it will the second, unless something fundamental has shifted? Your decision should not be based on how much you missed her, but on whether the two of you can now create something different, deeper, and more sustainable. Opening the door again doesn't have to mean diving in with open arms. It can mean starting slow, observing with discernment, and speaking with honesty. It means looking for consistent action, not just promising words. It means setting clear expectations and seeing if she can meet them without excuses. You're not obligated to be cold or distant, but you are obligated to protect your growth. If she wants access to you now, she needs to show that she respects what that means. You're not the same person who used to beg for her presence or settle for her silence. The better path is only possible if both people are willing to do better. One-sided hope will not carry a relationship forward. Mutual effort will. You have to be honest about what kind of relationship you want, and whether she's even capable of that kind of connection. A mature relationship requires emotional safety, consistency, respect, and clarity. If that's not what this new door leads to, then maybe it's not a door. It's a trap dressed up as opportunity. You don't need to punish her for the past. You don't need to respond with anger. But you do need to respond with wisdom. If you choose to walk through that door again, let it be because it leads to something that aligns with your values, your healing, and your purpose, not just your nostalgia. Let your standard be transformation, not history. Because the man you are becoming deserves a future rooted in growth, not one that recycles the very pain you worked so hard to move beyond. So take your time, reflect deeply, listen closely, not just to her words but to your intuition, and then decide with strength. The door you reopen must lead somewhere better. If it doesn't, it's not a door, it's a test. Pass it with clarity, pass it with self-respect. Pass it by choosing the version of your life that honors your growth.